Hey everybody, Dr. G here. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and body language expert, and today we're going to be analyzing the behavior and body language of Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy is one of the most notorious serial killers in the history of the United States. What we're going to be looking at today is his final interview before his execution. Before we get started, I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, let's go. If you watch my channel, you may have seen me use clips of this interview before, but I found a much higher quality version, so I thought we would do more analysis, a more in-depth analysis of parts of this interview. What I want you to keep in mind about this interview is that Ted Bundy is talking about the antecedents to what caused him to become a serial killer. He's blaming it largely on pornography, and the reason for that is because he is being interviewed by Reverend Dobson. The goal, I believe, was to get a stay of execution, so I think Ted Bundy was playing along. I don't believe that he believes a word he's saying regarding why he was a serial killer. Let's jump right in. We'll explain more as we go.
But as a young boy, and I mean a boy of 12, 13, certainly, that I encountered.
So you saw the tongue flick. You're going to see this a lot from Ted Bundy. He does this when he gets excited oftentimes. Watch this again, and this is what you need to look for.
12, 13, certainly, that I encountered outside the home again, in the local grocery store.
You also notice that he's closing his eyes. Now, I think the excitement comes from the fact that he's hoping that he can tell this story to Dr. Dobson, who's a religious leader, so he's against pornography, and the goal is to explain that pornography is at fault for the different things that he has ultimately done. So that's the story that he's telling right now. So when you see the tongue flick, when you see the excitement, that's the idea that maybe he'll get a stay of execution. However, now we're seeing his eyes closed. He closes his eyes because he doesn't like doing this. He's excited about the possibility of what could happen. He's hoping that he can con Dr. Dobson. However, he doesn't like the stories he's telling. Think about somebody that needs so much control that they murder and do the awful, savage things that Ted Bundy has done. I mean, truly, the things that he has done are almost indescribable. So the idea that he's having to share that credit with something else, the idea that he's having to do that, he is not going to like this. So he's going to be closing his eyes a lot throughout this interview because he ultimately is excited by the possibility of what could happen, but he doesn't like what he's doing.
The local drugstore, the softcore pornography, what people call softcore.
What people call softcore. So I want you to keep in mind, right now he is pandering to Dr. Dobson. In other words, suggesting that what is referred to as softcore is not soft at all, that it's awful and all of these things. And it's fine if you believe that, but Ted Bundy doesn't believe that. And that's the important thing.
Drugstore, the softcore pornography, what people call softcore. But as I think I explained to you last.
See, there was the tongue flick right afterward because he's excited by the possibility that he's pandering and this might work and maybe he can live another few days, another few weeks, another month, whatever it is.
I think I explained to you last night, Dr. Dobson, in an anecdote that as young boys do, we explored the back roads and sideways and byways of our neighborhood, and oftentimes people would dump.
And see, this is an attempt to connect with his audience. He's basically talking about something that he would do, something where he would ride around his neighborhood. When he looks Dr. Dobson directly in the eyes, the goal is to connect. He's leaning forward. His body is moving in. He wants to emotionally connect in those moments.
Ways of our neighborhood, and oftentimes people would dump the garbage and whatever they were cleaning out of their house, and from time to time we'd come across.
So you see how he's smiling as he's talking about this? This is a way to be relatable. He wants to smile, to connect. Ted Bundy was famous for being able to fake emotions because I can assure you the smiles, all of these subtle things, these are all 100% manipulations on his part.
Grocery store. My experience with, I say pornography generally, but with pornography that deals on a violent level with the sexuality.
So look, he raised his eyebrows. He's making direct eye contact with Dobson. This is a moment that he really wants to connect. But you'll also notice his chin is low. We oftentimes have this as a defensive maneuver. Now his chin isn't like tucked all the way in, but the way that his head is tilted, he's staying in a defensive stance while at the same time trying to draw attention to his face. He wants Dobson to hear he's addressing the sexuality, violent sexuality specifically.
Generally, but with pornography that deals on a violent level with the sexuality. is that
And after saying that, after talking about violent sexuality, he licked his lips and he did a hard swallow. These are things that excite him. So talking about this is in some way exciting him. Even though he doesn't like it when he actually starts blaming pornography for what he did, he doesn't mind talking about violent sexuality. Watch what I'm talking about right here.
level with the sexuality is that once you become addicted to it, and I look at this as a kind of addiction, like other kinds of addiction, I would keep looking for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of material. Like an addiction, you keep craving something which is harder, something which gives you a greater sense of
Now look at his face right here when he's talking about things that are more potent and explicit and harder. Watch the look he gets on his face.
something which
Once again, we've seen this from him. This isn't in this interview. In another interview, we've seen when he's talking about things that he's done to his victims. He seems to really savor what he's talking about. I know that's a disgusting way to put it, but it's true. And you can see that he's in almost ecstasy when he thinks about these awful things. This is a look of pleasure. This is someone who is connecting with an emotion very briefly. Watch this one last time.
you keep craving something which is harder, something which gives you a greater sense of excitement.
And once again, you see the eyebrows go up. You see him trying to connect with Dr. Dobson. He's trying to say all the right things.
You begin to wonder if maybe actually doing it will give you that which is beyond just reading about it or looking at it.
Ted, after you committed your first murder, what was the emotional effect on you? What happened in the days after that?
It was like...
There's that tongue flick again. Starts talking about the murders, talking about his first murder. The excitement is starting to flow. The adrenaline's coursing through his body. So this is an exciting moment for him to be talking about.
After, I don't want to over-dramatize it, but to have been possessed by something so awful and so alien, and then the next morning wake up from it.
So when he says possessed, alien, waking up from it, he's trying to defer responsibility. And this is going to be torturous for somebody like Bundy, because on the one hand, they want to own that responsibility. They want to be seen as powerful, having been the one to make all these choices. However, if he wants to be recommended for a stay of execution, he has to please his audience. So he's trying to connect on all these points where he says, look how bad pornography is. I'm giving you what you want. And also, I wasn't really responsible because I almost dissociated. I was in a trance. All of these kinds of things. Let's watch this part again.
I don't want to over-dramatize it, but to have been possessed by something so awful and so alien, and then the next morning wake up from it.
So he's talking about being possessed by pornography. Once again, it is putting an incredible amount of blame on something else, and it's exactly what Dr. Dobson wants him to talk about.
Absolutely horrified that I was capable of doing something like that.
You really hadn't known that before?
Basically, I was a normal person. I wasn't some...
So you're seeing a slight smirk. People often talk about when somebody's lying and they're getting away with it. Sometimes they can't help but smile. And this right here, after he says I was a normal person, you see the smile creep up. But I really think that he is smiling because there's something amusing to him about that.
Normal person. I wasn't some guy hanging out at bars or a bum, or I wasn't a pervert in the sense that, people look at somebody and say, I know there's something wrong with him, and just tell. I mean, I was essentially a normal person. I had good friends. I led a normal life.
Now watch his eyebrows right here after he says he had good friends.
I had good friends.
Now that's a very mild look of anger. So unconsciously, his brow furrowed as he's talking about this. There's something about that agitated him, actually.
Essentially a normal person. I had good friends. I led a normal life.
Ted Bundy has a unique way of making eye contact. When he talks about something that he really wants you to hear, he has almost exaggerated eye contact. When he wants Dr. Dobson to know, I had a normal life. Watch this part again.
Essentially a normal person. I had good friends. I led a normal life, except for this one small but very potent and very destructive segment of it that I kept very secret and very close to myself and didn't let anybody know about it. And part of the shock and horror from my dear friends and family years ago when I was first arrested was that there was no clue. They looked.
You'll notice both shoulders raised up when he said that. When we don't know something, we oftentimes go, I don't know. It's an elevating response because it's a vulnerable thing to raise both shoulders at the same time. So we see that as genuine. Sometimes if somebody says, I don't know, and they raise one shoulder, we see that as less committed. So when he's talking about people not knowing who he was, he really means that. Watch this right here.
Years ago when I was first arrested was that there was no clue. They looked at me and they looked at the all-American boy, and I mean, I wasn't perfect, but I want to be quite candid with you. I was okay. Okay, I was. The basic humanity and basic spirit that God gave me was intact, but.
So now you see his hands coming out. He's talking about the spirit that God gave him. He is trying to con. And so he is really getting more emphatic with this because he thinks he's making exquisite points right here. So you see the body language change when he is trying to con because he's got something he wants to get out of this.
Pornographic violence are not some kinds of inherent monsters. We are your sons and we are your husbands. And we grew up in regular families. And pornography.
And it's interesting. Watch when he says regular families.
And we grew up in regular families.
Now, Ted Bundy really didn't grow up in a regular family. There were a lot of strange things about his childhood. We can get into those in another video. But he even is lying about aspects like that.
And pornography can reach out and snatch a kid out of any house today. He snatched me out of my home. It snatched me out of my home 20, 30 years ago.
So think about the argument he's making, is that I'm a normal guy. Everything was normal in my life. And then he saw softcore pornography at grocery stores, came across more hard stuff in the trash, and now it's made him become the person he is today. I mean, think about how ludicrous that argument really is.
Against the kinds of influences that are loose in a society that tolerates.
So he's very effective, as I said, at faking emotions. That's what he's doing right now. He is trying so hard to cry. He's trying so hard to get those tears to come. So he's making these facial expressions. He's trying to get his eyes to glaze over. Watch this again, and we're going to see where it all goes.
That tolerates.
So think about how masterfully manipulative he is. He is getting tears that are getting ready to come forth. Think about the times that he probably did this with women. He did this with other people. Think about all of the times he's used these fake emotions to manipulate, because that's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing a series of fake emotions, and he's so good at faking them. He has an amazing sense of audience. That's one thing that I can say about Ted Bundy for sure, is he understands how to speak to people, how to connect with people. And that's what we've seen throughout all of this. He's using details that he thinks that connect with regular people. He's using body language that he thinks it can connect to Dr. Dobson, the way that he looks at him. And so now he's using tears to try to make it seem that he has authentic feelings about how tragic his situation is.
I'm here and you're here because of this message that you're talking about right here. You really feel that hardcore pornography and the doorway to it, softcore pornography, is doing untold damage to other people and causing other women to be abused and killed the way you did others.
Listen, I'm no social scientist, and I haven't done a survey. I mean,
such a brilliant way in terms of connecting with an audience. I'm no social scientist, and I haven't done a survey. It's trying to show this fake sense of humility that people will connect with. It makes him seem more believable.
And I don't pretend that I know what John Q. Citizen thinks about this. But I've lived in prison for a long time now. And I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, without question, without exception.
He's been working really hard on these tears, and they're finally starting to roll down his face.
Deeply influenced and consumed by an addiction to pornography.
Ted, what would your life have been like without that influence? You can only speculate.
Yeah. Well, I know it would have been far better, not just for me. And
that laugh. Now, if you've seen his interview from 1977, where he's in jail, he uses this laugh to deflect and to connect with people. Listen to this right here.
Well, I know it would have been far better, not just for me. And
so when people talk about him being charming, it's because he does things like that. That fake laugh, that slight chuckle is his way to connect. And I think that that's part of why people saw him as so charming. Now, if you watch that old interview, he's much more almost jovial in that, but all of it's fake. He's not actually laughing. It's not a real feeling.
And it's, excuse me for being so self-centered here. It would have been a lot better for me and lots of other people. I know that. Lots of other innocent people, victims and families. It would have been a lot better. There's no question, but...
And being able to think on his feet like this, talk about the victims and their families, it makes it sound like he has the capacity for empathy, which he absolutely does not. Well, he may have a little bit of empathy, enough to at least manipulate people, but he certainly doesn't feel guilt. That much I feel very confident of.
Years later, their lives have not returned to normal. They will never return to normal.
Absolutely.
Are you carrying that load, that weight? Is the remorse there?
Yes, absolutely.
As you can see him shaking his head, he says, yes, absolutely, and shakes his head no. This is something that we see sometimes, is that the feelings actually leak out when people are nodding their head or shaking their head. They do the way that they actually feel rather than what they're saying. Watch this part right here.
That load, that weight, is the remorse there?
Yes, absolutely. In the past few days, myself and a number of investigators have been talking about unsolved cases, murders that I was involved in. And it's hard to talk about all these years later because it revives in me all those terrible feelings and those thoughts that I have steadfastly and diligently dealt with, I think successfully, with the love of God.
It's interesting because when he talks about the things that matter to him, the details he wants you to hear, he provides excessive detail. He talks so much, but when it talks about the love of God, he's not really saying that much, and he actually says it quietly. Listen to this part right here.
And diligently dealt with, I think successfully, with the love of God. And yet it's reopened that, and I felt the pain.
Just to be super clear, y'all, I 100% think that this is manipulation by Ted Bundy. I do not think that he became a genuinely religious person in his later days in life. Jeffrey Dahmer is a different discussion, but Ted Bundy, there's no way.
20, 30 years ago, that is, in my formative stages. And what scares and appalls me, Dr. Dobson, is when I see what's on cable TV, some of the movies, I mean, some of...
So now he's trying to become moralistic, right? The idea that, my God, these movies that are being played, these awful things that people are seeing. And you notice he said Dr. Dobson. He's trying to connect by using his name. So when you know that he's got a really manipulative point to make, he's going to try to connect more and more. More eye contact, more referring to people by their names, more chuckling, more smiling. Watch this interaction again, then we'll keep going.
My formative stages. And what scares and appalls me, Dr. Dobson, is when I see what's on cable TV, some of the movies, I mean, some of the violence in the movies that come into homes today was stuff that they wouldn't show in X-rated adult theaters 30 years ago. This stuff...
The slasher movies that you're talking about.
That stuff is, I'm telling you, from...
And now you see him putting his hands together almost like he's praying, because this is so important to him that he connect on this level, because he knows how strongly Dr. Dobson and other people that follow Dr. Dobson probably feel about these things. So this is the pinnacle of his performance. Aside from the crying, this is what he wants him to hear.
Personal experience, the most, that is graphic violence on screen, particularly as it gets into the home to children who may be unattended or unaware that they may be a Ted Bundy who has that vulnerability to that predisposition to be influenced by that kind of behavior, by that kind of movie, that kind.
Now, this is interesting. This was a bit of a Freudian slip here. So he said influenced by that type of behavior or that type of movie, because he knows that his behavior is really the core of this. He knows it's not pornography. He knows it's not violent movies. He knows his behavior is the central core and the problem here. Watch this part right here again.
Maybe a Ted Bundy who has that vulnerability to that predisposition to be influenced by that kind of behavior, by that kind of movie, that kind of violence. There are kids sitting out there switching the TV dial around and come upon these movies late at night, or I don't know when they're on, but they're on and any kid can watch them. It's scary when I think what would have happened.
See how closed his eyes are staying right now? This is such a stupid lie, and even he struggles to get it out. He, on the one hand, enjoys the performance. On the other, it bothers him that he's making up these ridiculous lies.
As you approach these final, it's going to be
being
easy.
in the valley of the shadow of death is something that I've become all that accustomed to, and that I'm strong and nothing's bothering me. Listen, it's no fun. It gets kind of lonely. And yet, I have to remind myself that every one of us...
Now, for just a minute there, we saw a little bit of real fear leak out. Watch his mouth right here.
I have to remind myself that every one of us...
Now, that look right there, that is an actual look of fear. So it's interesting because we've seen Ted Bundy, the predator, the liar, the con man. This is Ted Bundy actually experiencing fear because he is facing his execution the following morning after this interview.
I have to remind myself that every one of us will go through this someday in one way or another.
And he does it again. He does it twice, actually.
Will go through this someday.
You know, he does that again. Once again, that is a genuine sign of fear. So he certainly was capable of feeling afraid, if nothing else, than about his own mortality.
In one way or another, and countless millions who have walked this earth before us have. So this is just an experience which we all share.
Yeah.
Here I am.
So I hope this has been interesting for you. We've gotten a chance to see Ted Bundy lie for a while because barely anything that he said was in fact actually true. He was really trying to con his way into getting a stay of execution or for something to come from this because there was an ulterior motive. Obviously, it didn't work, but hopefully this is helping you better understand how to read Ted Bundy's body language. If you have other people you want to see that I can do flashback forensics on just like this one, please let me know in the comments below. Last thing before we get finished up is I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, thanks for watching.